me? Or has the silly season that we expected to be incredibly silly just gotten less silly? In fact, it's now getting a little bit boring. And can you guess why I partially feel that way? Yep. It has something to do with our favourite pancake man. Don't worry, I'm not going to be spending the entire video complaining about Carlos Sainz and his predicament, where he has now openly mentioned that plans for 2025 are not moving too quickly. And then when you hear about what's going on with Alex Albon, and that he's now signed to Williams, it's all making me start to think that the driver market has started to crystallise in May, which is incredibly early, and I suppose that was not helped by Lewis Hamilton being announced back in February. The major players, such as Fernando Alonso, are now being all wrapped up and conveniently stored away on multi-year contracts that have no end date in sight. It's effectively all of the teams just saying to the other teams, well, what's the end date of theirs got to do with you, big nose? Alex Albon now being signed to Williams for quite a few years, at least 2, is taken away some very major prospects from both Mercedes and Red Bull, because Albon's name has come up for both teams. But I reckon that the reason why Alex has stayed has got something to do with his options closing before him, and maybe Williams being the only option he realistically had. It's not looking great for that team, especially with the news that the FW46 has got an even bigger weight problem than the Alpine car had, supposedly 15 kilos over the weight limit, and that's equivalent to nearly half a second in performance lost just to heavy bits of machinery. Yes, if they can get on top of that, it's a huge literal weight off their mind, but right now, I think Williams have got bigger problems to deal with right now. And oh yes, whoever's in charge of the social media team at Williams, don't copy what Aston Martin did with Fernando. It's been done. All the other spots are at the lower teams. We still have got 11 drivers whose contracts are up at the end of the season. There could be some fiery stuff further down the line, but I do think some of the major players are either going to be just staying where they are, or leaving the sport, or maybe just making some less interesting moves. So let's start off with one that has really gotten the headlines lately, Kevin Magnussen. Let's be honest here, things aren't looking all that great for Kevin. With a race ban on the cards for him if he gets into trouble at Imola, and the new Haas team principal keen to make his mark on the team, starting with litigating the previous boss, that could also mean that the Dane's future at that team, which has effectively become Haas itself, will no longer be the case. And another thing that's really not helping Kevin's campaign to stay at Haas for yet another year, Kevin's not really looking to babysit any brand new drivers. And I think that is not really the wisest thing to say, given how much Komatsu is obsessed with Oliver Behrman and how much he can offer in strengthening the bond that Haas and Ferrari have, Gene very especially looking to do so because, hey, it might cut down costs. Even more so, less money he has to pump into the team. It's really not gelling well with the overall dynamic in where the team is going, and I think he knows it. Right now, he's playing the team game, and it's really not fair for Magnussen. He should be able to excel in his own right. Maybe if that's the case and the roles are flipped and Kevin has a good quali session and Nico doesn't, maybe Nico might return the favour. But right now, it's not looking likely because Kevin, like he did last year, looks kind of lost, and maybe the loss of Steiner has lost a very important figure in keeping him around F1. He might have accepted that 2025 might not be likely. The other unfortunate reality is that Kevin and Haas, they're made for each other. Kevin's typecast as a Haas driver. He's not really lasted long at other teams other than Haas. So if Haas don't want him, I really don't see any other team wanting him in F1 either. So potential options for him, I think, are pretty much zero. Now with Valtteri Bottas, he's an interesting case. Sure, he's not as outwardly capable as he was at Mercedes, but the first half of his debut season with Alfa Romeo showed flickers of real brilliance that ultimately ended up fading away through no fault of his own come the end of the year, and has since failed to return consistently. Now this year, the first of 2 years being known as Sauber before they become Audi, Bottas has shown moments that he can bring back that potential. There were glimmers of hope that maybe he could bag a couple of points and get Sauber off the bottom of the constructors where they currently are. But thanks to reliability issues, pit stop issues that affected his teammate as well, it's really limited what Bottas can do, and he has now started to vocalise his frustration after having been relatively quiet last year, hoping that Audi might look his way and go, "Bottas, I want you to stay." "Okay," said Valtteri. But that's not happened. The consequences of that were very evident in Miami when he bagged a penalty through no fault of his own because his race engineer didn't tell him that Piastri was coming right at him. Seriously, race engineers and drivers, it's a very important relationship, very underrated. And given that he does have brand appeal and he does have skill remaining, and his ability to train up Zhou Guanyu in his rookie year was incredibly commendable, there are other opportunities for him further down the grid. I did think about Williams for a point, but given that Toto is equally, if not more obsessed with Kimi Antonelli and getting him into the sport, I really doubt that he would fill that seat up with Bottas. It would deny us a full circle maneuver where he starts at Williams and he ends at Williams, but I do think Haas would be more likely, because he might do a really good job at educating Behrman, getting him up to speed, being the tutor, and maybe getting a chance to be even more eccentric at Haas, because they do have a very characteristic side, and, Chipotle and Bottas with his Uber connection. Wow, the mullet at Haas, incredible. But at the very least, I do see him having a chance at one other team. I think he does deserve better opportunities at a team which is kind of going places, because you wouldn't have been saying that about Haas even just 6 months ago. I think that could work, but one thing I think might not work in time would be Logan Sargeant staying in the sport, and that pains me to say it. I just gotta be real with you. I really don't think Logan has a chance at staying at Williams next year. And really, he's not had the opportunity to showcase what he can do. Other than the fact that, so far this year, the highest position that a Williams has bagged was Logan Sargeant himself, 10th in the Miami Sprint. And if you look to the Destructors Championship, something that everyone was looking at, and Logan Sargeant was at the top. Is he at the top right now? No. Would you like to take a guess of who is? Well, his teammate. Logan isn't even in the top 3. Kevin can't seem to stay in his own section of the video, can he? I reckon he has improved from last year, but I don't think these improvements are very obvious, given that Williams is going through a mini transformation of their own, much smaller than what Audi is doing over at Sauber, but it is worth noting. And of course, that weight issue is seriously impacting what Logan and Alex can do. If you cut half a second off that Williams car, that probably would have been enough to maybe bag a point or two, or at least get them back in contention with Haas and Racing Bulls. But right now, they can't do that. They need to work on other things. And Logan's future is going to be sort of sacrificed in the pursuit of Williams getting back into the midfield more consistently, or maybe closer to the front runners for 2026. Logan just came at the wrong time, unfortunately. He'll be collateral damage for either Kimi Antonelli or somebody else to enjoy more success with, either in later of 2025 or in 2026. My hopes for him realistically are for him to get a chance in IndyCar perhaps, because he was considering before Formula 1, because it's worked out for Théo Pourchaire and Callum Ilott, them really able to show what they can do with McLaren, and Callum getting a chance in the Indy 500 and Théo Pourchaire seeing out the rest of the season with McLaren's IndyCar division. That's really good for him. I'm really happy for them both. And also, I did have a very macabre thought that maybe if Andretti are successful and they get an opportunity to get into Formula 1, what if they bag Logan Sargeant as one of their American drivers? Logan does have experience of Formula 1 already. He's an American driver who was wronged. Andretti had been wronged by Formula 1's management. What if this was ending up as the Logan revenge arc coming in 2027? Ooh, spicy. Now with Zhou Guanyu, it's not all that much different to Bottas' situation in a way. The way I see it is Bottas and Zhou, they're just minding their own business, sitting on a sofa, whilst all around them, the entire Sauber factory is being demolished around them, Audi putting up their own signage, changing everything, renovating everything, and they're just watching it all happen, nobody paying them any attention, and then Andreas Seidel walks up to them and going, "Are you two still here?" Because it's quite clear that Seidel does not show any interest in keeping either of them for 2025. Audi having much better ideas and already signing Hülkenberg, and they want Sainz, they really, really do, but Carlos isn't playing ball right now, so right now they are just changing the team around Bottas and Zhou and are expecting them to maybe get some results, but if they don't, oh well, Sauber sucks, Audi doesn't suck. Despite that, Valtteri did his best to ensure that Zhou's time in F1 has been fine. Nothing spectacular, but we've seen that Zhou is a perfectly competent driver. There could be teams that might be a breath of fresh air for him and unleash his potential, such as Haas should Bottas be overlooked. And let's not forget the Chinese impact that was very evident at Shanghai. Zhou is a fairly decent driver, but the attention from China, which was fully realised at the Shanghai Grand Prix this year, is something that no team should ignore whatsoever. And I'm personally thrilled that F1 made his dream of racing in front of his home crowd a reality. And for anyone poking fun at that, just Don't. You should be ashamed of yourself. Just let the guy have that dream. If I were in his shoes, I would be absolutely over the moon. Okay, if I don't get a seat in F1 next year, alright, whatever. At least I got to race in front of my home crowd. He could go back to Alpine's fold, perhaps, since he was part of their academy, but they're already looking at their own academy drivers of Matans and Doohan, and maybe the odds aren't likely, so Haas does seem like his best bet in my opinion. Now, this is one of two big drivers that might spring one last surprise in this silly season, and that is Sergio Perez, but even that one's more likely to become quite boring, because so far, Checo is doing everything possible to stay at Red Bull. So long as he keeps second place in the driver's standings and ensures that Red Bull does the double again, this time much earlier than they did last year, then I bet Horner doesn't really see much point in changing things up, because Max doesn't care who is his teammate, but I'm pretty sure that Checo becoming his longest serving teammate does count for something. Checo does bring a lot to the table, especially when you look at the brass tacks, because when you look at the stats about which company is the biggest seller of energy drinks in the region, Red Bull just about pips it. If Perez were to go, then Monster Energy would be the best-selling energy drink in Mexico. No doubt. Millions of dollars of Red Bull's bottom line in the Central American region would be gone. So long as Checo doesn't make too many mistakes and he continues to help out Max as best he can, I don't really see Red Bull changing it so long as they are still on top. If that changes in 2026 though, and they do lose positions and lose traction, then I think they might change it. It really helps Checo that Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda are busy struggling with their own seats for next year, and now Alex Albon's no longer in consideration. Those were the biggest three candidates to take away that seat from him, and now they're gone. Or at least they're busy with their own lot, because Liam Lawson's lurking in the background at Racing Bulls. So yeah, Checo's sitting pretty right now. And all the drama at Red Bull in the internal investigations, he's got nothing to do with it. He's doing very well. But if he were to lose that seat, I could easily see him going to Sauber perhaps, them potentially wanting to really make the most of his insight at Red Bull, having seen them go from being the contenders to Mercedes to being the utter dominating machine that they were in 2023 especially. That wouldn't go unnoticed, and that could easily happen if the next driver completely snubs Audi for good and denies us the opportunity to see the Renault lineup appearing once again, and that driver being Carlos Sainz. Okay, I really do not have much sympathy for this driver anymore, because he's been stalling, and by his own admission, it's not really moving. Things are going to happen when they happen. And this was contrary to what he said not too long ago, where things were improving at a rapid pace and we could expect a news bulletin coming in the next few weeks, but a few weeks have happened and nothing. Things are slowing down. And that might be down to the fact that Checo is doing the business at Red Bull. He's not rocking the boat. Max is happy. Red Bull is happy. The Racing Bull drivers are doing their own thing. So why would they change anything? So I think maybe that avenue that Carlos has been desperately chasing is starting to get thinner and thinner in terms of walking down it. So Audi's been starting to publicize that Carlos is the best driver on the grid that's available. Please, Carlos, accept us. We want you. Feeling wanted is a huge deal for any driver, but according to Carlos, that simply isn't enough. They're offering tons of money. They're offering an ambassadorial deal for the rest of his life, and Audi. It's Audi. That's a huge deal and really good prospect. And that was certainly enough to convince Hulkenberg to go there. Even after Haas did everything in their power to keep him, that wasn't enough. And I just feel like Sainz is really doing something foolish here. I've talked about this in plenty of other videos, but I do think that this could easily fall flat. And whilst Christian Horner has been flirting with him every now and again, saying that, oh, well, we have noticed he is unemployed, I do think that will ultimately not go anywhere. I could easily see eventually Carlos's opportunities dwindle, that Audi get bored and they look for somebody else, people that I'm going to mention later in the video, and that maybe Sainz decides that, you know what, the Ferrari deal kind of threw me for six, and I'll take a sabbatical. And we might see Carlos Sainz doing something at WEC. And I know what you're going to say. Carlos Sainz Sr. has partnered up with Ford for a few years in the rallying department, but that's not enough to convince me that Carlos Jr. would be partnering up with Red Bull since they're partnering up with Ford. Then another Red Bull hopeful for Checo's seat, Daniel Ricciardo. Ah, yes. Well, that's changed in the last few races, hasn't it? Everyone thinking not too long ago that, oh, Daniel's washed, oh, they need to get rid of him for Imola, and the rumours were floating about that, Liam Lawson could have taken that seat, but those were rubbish, and many people, especially Helmut Marko, thinking that it was Liam Lawson's team themselves spreading all of those rumours, because, New Zealand are very, very keen to get a very big star driver from their country back into Formula One, and maybe get a win for the first time in over 50 years. But I do think that Daniel Ricciardo has turned a corner somewhat. That chassis change has made all the difference for his overall confidence. Sometimes that can easily be enough. And if he's able to score points a little more regularly and not make any big mistakes and keep his head down, then that might be enough to keep him at that team for another year. I do think the odds of him getting back into the top team alongside Max Verstappen, they are starting to dwindle considerably. I don't think he's done enough to justify that. He does bring a lot of marketing power in of itself. Maybe not enough to justify replacing Checo, because again, Red Bull energy drink sales in Mexico, that's not something to, turn your nose up at. He's already doing the business in supplying the sponsorship deals with Visa and Cash App, which would be worth several tens of millions of dollars already. So he does a lot more good at VCARB and Racing Bulls. If VCARB do the business and compete against Aston Martin for 5th place, or at least secure a very strong 6th, then I don't see that team changing their lineup for next year, because it works. Because the other VCARB driver in Yuki Tsunoda is having an even better season. It's the best start to a season Yuki has ever had. So I do think that he is good for that seat for 2025. And as for his long-term future in sport, I think it's looking pretty rosy. Many people thinking that maybe he might go to Aston Martin, but I don't really see that happening. Because even though Honda is really looking to Tsunoda's career with great interest and they hope that he stays in Formula One, they have promised Aston Martin that they are not going to be manipulating the lineup in their favour. There are many other teams up and down the grid that could value Tsunoda's influence, because he is very popular with teenage markets, according to Helmut Marko, the young fans of Formula One really appealing to Yuki's, rebellious streak and youthful nature, and also for the fact that, he's interesting. He's a character. And we all know that characters in Formula One do last longer than ones who are a bit like wet cardboard. But I do think that after next year, he should really do what Pierre did and start to forge his own destiny, talking to other teams. Even though I predicted he'd get into Red Bull next year, I don't think Christian Horner sees a future in him at the same table as Max. I really don't think he's taking him seriously. And yes, I know Laurent Mekies is the team principal at VCARB, but let's be real. Christian Horner's in charge of the entire Red Bull empire and both teams. I don't think that Tsunoda's time in F1 is at an end just yet. I think he's got a few more years left in him, especially if he continues his upward ascent. Okay, alright, Lance Stroll. I know, his contract is as long as a piece of string. You can't really quantify it with an actual number. But let's be real. If Aston Martin do drop him, is any other team really going to hire him unless Lance Stroll puts in hundreds of millions of dollars into their operation? No, I don't think so. Esteban Ocon next, the two Alpine drivers. Ocon may not be my cup of tea, but he is a talent and he is notable amongst other teams, and Toto still has his back. And Esteban is very keen to tell people that he still has that connection with Mercedes in his pocket, that might ensure that he doesn't experience what he had in 2019 when he was forced to take a year out because, well, he was dropped by Racing Point, and that was it, really. But the difference here between 2019 and 2024 is that the team he's currently at still wants him. In an ideal world, Alpine would like to keep both drivers, since they are a constant, they are just about keeping their tempers under control, and they are now starting to score points, and they seem to be a really solid operation in terms of their marketing appeal, and the fact that they're French. That is a very big deal for a French team. But at the moment, I do think that Alpine are starting to realise that Ocon might be on the way out, considering that he's been there for a very long time, and that maybe he's realising that he's going to make a big move to a top-tier team relatively soon. And yes, the Mercedes connection is there, and he might be in the offing for that second seat, but what does not help him is that Lewis Hamilton has come out and said that if he were to have anyone replace him at Mercedes, it would be Kimi Antonelli. Oh! When you get the multiple world champion saying that, I want you to replace me at this team, Imagine the pressure on that guy, my goodness. But this makes me think that Ocon's probably not likely for that seat. So if I were him, I would just stay at Alpine for the time being, but there are rumblings, many rumblings in fact, rumblings, what have you, is that Sauber are looking at him, and for the longest time he was a favourite before Carlos Sainz became available. Because, you know, the whole thing with Hamilton, Sainz, that suddenly made Sauber look, ooh, he's there. But before then, Ocon was one of the ones likely to partner up with, now Hülkenberg seemingly likely to be taking up that seat for the longest time. And I do believe that Ocon's team should really take that offer seriously if it comes their way, because if they quickly snap it up and seal the deal, then that could easily leave Carlos Sainz without a drive because he's been taking so long, deferring the Audi operation, the opportunities, which look really juicy. Ocon does have an opportunity to swipe in underneath the Spaniard and take that seat from under him. But at the same time, Alpine are showing improvements and they are steadily upgrading the car to make it not terrible. They might have done enough to secure Ocon for yet another couple of more years. That could easily happen. Same thing could happen with Gasly. Because I think that losing Gasly would hit the team even harder than Ocon. Because, yeah, Ocon's been around. If he leaves, then, you know, it was inevitable. But Pierre? No. He is such a loyal member. He's been talking up Alpine so much. He's been so reliant on them improving. He's been talking about them constantly. So if he suddenly flips the script and goes, you know what, I'm out, that would be a huge dent in their overall confidence and what they can provide any other team member. They would have to rely on their rookie drivers from F2 and other series. Maybe Mick Schumacher and the WEC division, but I won't talk about that anymore here. But what's going in their favour is that Gasly's been very patient and glowing at the fact that he is operating for a works team, and that could easily improve and they could easily progress, which they are doing. But Gasly is running out of time if he wants to get anywhere near a top tier team, and considering that one team has effectively iced him out no matter what he does, he needs to think of other places, because right now, I don't think he has much choice other than to stick with Alpine. And that is something I talk more about in this video here, its own dedicated video that you can go and watch right now. And I really do feel sorry for Pierre, but if this pays off and they do improve, then Pierre might have pulled a blinder.